So the last piece of legislation we need to look at is the Taft-Hartley Act. As you can see, the Taft-Hartley Act was passed in 1947. Lots had changed since the 1930s. Remember the other two acts, the Norris-LaGuardia Act and the Wagner Act that we looked at, were passed in 1932 and 1935. 1947, obviously, the Second World War had occurred, and labor men were coming back from the war, facing some difficulties. There were lots of shortages at the end of the Second World War as the economy switched over from a wartime production to peacetime production. It led to a lot of shortages. Shortages of houses. There were shortages of higher education. There were shortages of food. There were all sorts of shortages. And so we've got hardened combat veterans coming back to a society that wasn't providing them the things they really wanted. Remember also that a lot of people had put their lives on hold. We'd had the Great Depression starting in 1929, going up to the beginning of the First World War. Then we had the years of the war. So we had a long stretch there in which people really put their lives on hold. And now these veterans are coming back and saying, we're older, we fought for our country, we put our lives on our line, and it's time for the country to give back. Unfortunately, because of the shortages, because of everything that was going on, we couldn't. The American dream was again delayed. And in 1946, early 1947, we saw some labor unrest, some strikes, things like that. And public opinion was beginning to turn against labor unions, that they were asking too much, they were promising too much, all of this. And so in 1947, we see a piece of legislation which actually, to a certain extent, curtails some union power. The Taft-Hartley Act sets up 3 different types of shops or places of employment. The first is the closed shop. Closed shops are illegal everywhere in the country. A closed shop is a place of employment in which you must be a union member to be hired. Now, that's illegal because it's discriminatory against non-union workers. This is particularly difficult. Closed shops are particularly difficult because in some cases, in order to become a union member, you need to have a job in the industry. But if that's the case, if you need to be a union member to be hired, but you need the job in order to join the union, how does anybody ever break into the union? All right, so that's difficult. So closed shops become illegal everywhere in the country. Now, the Taft-Hartley Act gave states the rights to determine whether or not something called a union shop was going to be legal. A union shop is one in which you don't have to be a union member to be hired, but you must join the union or pay union dues within 30 days of being hired. All right. Now, if any of you have worked in a grocery store other than Wegmans, you know what this is like. Even if you're part-time, you have to start paying union dues. Wegmans, when it came in, if any of you lived in the area when the Wegmans on 202 in Bridgewater opened, unions were picketing Wegmans. They picketed Wegmans for years because Wegmans is non-union. When they started in New York State, they were not union, and when they expanded, they continued to be non-union. All right. In New Jersey, union shops are legal. Okay, hence why if you ever worked in a grocery store other than Wegmans, you were forced to join a union. So states have the right to determine whether union shops are legal. The other type of shop set up under the Taft-Hartley Act is something called an open shop. And that's where union and non-union workers work side by side, in which you can choose to join the union, you choose not to join the union. In most cases, when you have an open shop, agreements are usually made that the non-union workers get the same rights as the union workers, but not always the case. If you're employed in an open shop and you can negotiate well, why not negotiate a better salary or a better package? It's going to depend on where you're working, whether the union contract is going to apply to non-union workers. All right, that's really about all I wanted to talk to you about labor unions, but I do want to have you think about something as you read the labor union article in the module this week. Pay particular attention to what each group feels about labor unions. Do they like them? Don't they like them? What do they think their future of labor unions should be? Think about some labor unions and figure out what you think about them. We've just spent several lectures looking at labor. And I wanted to add just to the end of this labor lecture a quick presentation on interest, rent, and profit. If you think of wages as returns to labor, we need to look at returns to other factors of production. And the other factors of production are land and capital. So hence interest, rent, and profit. Let's start by looking at returns to capital. Capital can be money and it can also be business production. So when we look at returns to capital, let's start by looking at returns to money. Returns to money usually gets measured in something we call an interest rate. If I were to invest the money, how much money would I get in return? If you were to put money in a savings account, how much money would you get back? All right. When we talk about interest rates, we have to be careful that there are two different interest rates that we talk about. In English, I'm not sure if another language, but in English, we don't have a different word for the interest that you get paid on a savings account or the interest that you pay on a loan. To us, we only have one word. Now, if we were to look at the factors, if you're going to go into a bank and get a car loan, what factors are going to influence the interest rate that you pay on the loan? There are lots of things. Your age, how much you want to borrow, your credit history, what you want to buy. Basically, it all boils down to risk. The riskier the loan, the more interest that you're going to have to pay on that investment. Now, when you're looking at the interest rate you are going to pay on a loan, you want to look at the two different types of interest rates. First is the nominal interest rate, and that's the interest rate the bank quotes you. You come in to get a car loan, you're paying 5%, right? Now, that interest rate is going to depend on the supply and the demand for loans. How many people are trying to get loans for cars? Right now, we see lots of 0% interest rates to get for car loans because they want people to come in and buy a car. Now, while the nominal interest rate is important, another measure of interest is the real interest rate. And remember, I warned you, whenever we look at the word real, it tells you that something has been adjusted. In the case of interest rates, the real interest rate is the interest rate with inflation factored out. Another issue, now some of you who've taken accounting may have seen this issue before. Another issue that we need to look at is, what is the value today of a payment you're going to receive in the future? For example, you buy a bond, and the bond says that I will pay you $300 3 years from now at 10% interest. Well, how much should you pay for that bond? You certainly don't want to pay $300 because that's what you're going to get paid back. And that $300 includes the interest. So, accounting people, one of the things you look at, and hopefully you've looked at in accounting, is something called net present value. Net present value is the value today of something that you receive in the future. So let's go back to that example I gave you. If you're going to buy a bond, it's going to pay you $300 3 years from now. And it's 10% interest. This is how you'd find your net present value. You take the principal, and principal is simply the amount of money you're being repaid, and you divide that by 1 plus the interest rate, that sum taken to the power of time. Now, in the example here, we're going to receive $300, so that is our principal, divided by 1 plus 0.1, which is 10%, that sum taken to the power of time, which is 3 years. So 1 plus 0.1 is 1.1 cubed. 1.1 cubed is 1.331. So 300 divided by 1.331 equals $225.39. So you're going to pay no more than $225.39 for this bond. Now, what happens if we come up with a different repayment schedule? Now, don't freak out on this. This is with all the numbers. Just look here. In example 2, we are receiving a bond that we're still going to get $300 back, but instead we get payments over the next 3 years. So what we have to do is find the net present value of each. So you're getting $100 in each of the 3 years, so the principal's $100, but now the denominator is 1 plus 0.1 to the first power. That's how much you're getting back the first year. Then 1 plus 0.1 squared. That's what you're getting back the second year. And then 1 plus 0.1 cubed, because that's the payment you get in the 3 years. So you have to find the net present value of each of the 3 years. If you do the math, which I've shown you here, it comes out to $248. Why are you willing to pay more for a bond that gives you this repayment schedule than the first one? Well, it has to do with the fact that there's less risk involved, because you're only risking $100 for 3 years. And so the payments, as you get your money back, you can do whatever you want. After the first year, you're getting $90.91 back. Or you're getting actually $100 back, but you can do something with it. You're not tying it up. There's less risk in example 2 than there is in example 1. So you're willing to pay more for that bond.